Hi, I'm Dave Sherwood, the CEO of Vygo. I'm here to introduce you to Campus Convos, the podcast where we discuss all things tech and education. Hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe on wherever you listen to your podcasts, and please give a share to others interested in the space.
I'm so glad you're doing a podcast.
You're really the motivation to get me into it, in the sense that, like, we toyed around years ago, never too seriously. But obviously from talking to you and just seeing yours, I feel as a CEO, you really need to.
Man, I'm super excited to come on. I'm super excited you guys are doing a podcast. I've always loved your advice and your opinions about the space. And you've been on my podcast now as well. Love being on here and very excited to be a listener of the show as well, because Vygo is doing amazing things in the space. I've loved following them for years before you became an investor. And then I've loved having you working with us as a mentor for the last few years. Mate, very excited to have this conversation.
And your podcast, Joel, or your several podcasts over the years, have been a real motivation for me. I think first I listened to the one that you and Ben did about the lead up to your Series A and the whole kind of journey and ups and downs of can we survive in the early days. And it reminded me a lot of the early days of Vygo, and it was such a well done production. But also your more recent productions as well have been really well put together, and I've been looking at them and been like, man, I really need to get onto one of these. And you and I talked about it a while ago. So yeah, you're definitely like a key reason that I've started doing these, Joel. And if I can make these almost as good as your podcast, I think we're onto something.
I love that, man. Look, I just think there's so much power in conversation. And so much of what I've learned throughout my life always come from interesting moments and interesting conversations with people. That's the whole premise behind Vygo. Vygo was born from interesting moments where people were able to change the trajectory of my life because they spoke to me at the right time. And our whole platform is built to connect people with those moments. When a student's struggling, we want to connect them with that moment of impact, that moment of support, whether that's from another mentor, tutor, counselor. But I just think podcasts are a huge hack for that. There are no platforms like that for CEOs and startup founders, but I think podcasts give you this like weird amount of access to people. I just want to learn from the smartest people I can. And so I do the podcast because I get to learn from incredible people, and I hope I can get to share that with others as well. Yeah, mate, I think everyone should do a podcast, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's interesting, like years ago, just like reaching out to people cold on LinkedIn. I don't know, like some famous edtech founder or whatever. They'd often respond, particularly if you're like, I just want to chat, I want to learn some things about how to build a company and all that. But I feel like a podcast is that taken to a much higher level, and you get access to more people for more time and build better relationships. So it seems like a natural extension of those like cold coffee meetups people used to do a long time ago. And what exactly was the motivation for you guys doing that initial podcast and then more recently your new series of podcasts? Like, why are you doing them?
I'm doing them for a few reasons, but the main one is I love the conversations. The ability to spend an hour of like very uninterrupted and present time with someone is so unique, like in general in my life at the moment. It's always pulled in so many different directions with work. And first things, you get to sit down and have these very uninterrupted conversations. But you get to have them with people that are just so smart. Like I'm bringing on people that I just want to learn from. The main reason I do them is because I want to meet as many interesting and unique and smart people as I can to shape and reshape the way I think about the world and my business and my path forward. That's the number one. And that's why I love doing it. I don't like the editing or the posting or the hosting, but the conversations are amazing. And then since doing it, I've just seen like it's such an incredible branding exercise, like for your company and for yourself personally, being CEO. And we were talking offline, but like increasingly as your company grows, you become more and more of a figurehead. It's so important to have that kind of strong brand. So when you are looking for investment for your company, or when you're looking to hire new people, you want people to see who you are and to be able to trust you, and you want to put more information out there. And content's just such an important part of that these days. And I think as future companies raise different rounds and hire more and more exceptional people, I think they're going to want to see more and more information about that person, about that business.
That all makes a lot of sense, Joel, and resonates with me. As I was saying to you before, I do a 360 every year fed in by my team, the board, maybe a few other stakeholders. So there's competencies and you get rated on each one with detailed answers from each person. And then it says, these are the ones you should be working on because A, they're the ones that you're not so good at relative to other areas, but B, everyone feels are important for your function, because there's no point developing something that you're not good at that's not particularly important for your function. So yeah, communication came up for me. This feels like a really good way to both have direct conversations, but also build a bit of a conversation around LinkedIn and other socials.
I love the fact that wanting to work on communication is what has led you to this. And I do think branding, blah, 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 there is so much outside of that. But one thing I've noticed, and it was a really unexpected benefit, and it feels like it's the primary thing you're going for, is that my ability to just communicate well has improved massively. Like when I sit down and have a conversation with someone, I feel like I know how to listen better and respond better. I know how to ask better questions and summarize. I get more and more compliments as time goes by at, wow, I feel like you really heard me, or that was a really interesting question, or thanks for taking the time. And that's all happened just because I guess you're now going to have these sit down, like hour-long conversations where your whole thing is, I want to connect with this person. So that interesting challenge, I think, will definitely pay back dividends on the communication front.
And it's an interesting point because my last guest was Shannon Meadows, who's a board member of ours, previously a chief revenue officer. You know her. I think
awesome.
She's given you guys a bit of advice over the years. But yeah, I know her really well, right? Like we've spent many hours both like working together in a team, but also, as is common with your CRO travel, right? We'd go see this customer or that prospect. So we had a ton of one-to-one time. And there were elements of that conversation that gave me a bit of insight into her thinking in her past. I find myself learning some big things about how she's thinking and what's happened to her in the past. And yeah, it's crazy actually. I guess it forces you, this kind of conversation, to be a bit more structured and dig a bit deeper than you might if you're just casually catching up. But today, you and I are going to talk a bit about student success and students' expectations, what students are expecting from their institutions and how it's affecting their success. I think it ties really nicely into what you guys do at Vygo, which is technology to connect students, as you mentioned before, which is so critical. And in the post-COVID days, it seems totally normal to be having everyone connected electronically on Slack and Teams in the workplace. But in the university space, and certainly pre-COVID, I think that those connections were just not there. And so your platform's doing something really innovative and very specific to the university space as well. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on the topic and like how Vygo has been like affecting and driving change.
Yeah, mate, I think we've probably had 50 conversations about this. I obviously just love this space, and I love speaking to people who are passionate in this space as well. There's so many challenges in the education space that we need to come together to solve, and the people side of it is just so important. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I had a lot of issues when I went to university. I started in university. I immediately like just started failing across the board. I felt so out of my depth. I felt so lost. I went and spoke to a career advisor, an academic advisor at one point. He looked at all of my records and he said, mate, honestly, you should consider dropping out before census date so you don't waste any money. And I was like, what the hell? So I felt really stuck. I didn't know where to turn. Like university, no one in the history of my family had ever gone to university. I felt really lost and alone and I guess like helpless. And I'm sure there's been times, Dave, when you felt helpless, like you didn't know where to turn. Like I'm not the only person that's ever had that experience, but I just got to this really low point at university. There's these two clear paths in front of me. One is the university path I've been trying so hard at. I've done everything I know how to do. I'm just a failure. And I've got the pieces of paper and the advice from the university to tell me that I'm a failure. And the other path, my dad is a concreter. Both of my brothers are concreters. And all of my uncles are concreters. Like, I'm meant to be on that path. And I'm thinking about which way do I want to go. And I think I've flown too close to the sun. I'm not meant to be here. This isn't my path. I don't belong. And I really felt like I didn't belong. Like I just snuck in. And right at my lowest point, just by chance, this random guy came up to me on campus. Mate, what's going on? And I was just like, everything sucks. But he came and sat down with me, and this guy was so awesome. He was like a fourth year engineering student, and I studied engineering, and he was so cool, and he seemed so smart. He was about to graduate. And I was just like, I'd kill to be this guy. Like, why don't I belong here like this guy? And I remember right at the end of the call, he said, I don't know if you can swear on this podcast, Dave, but this guy swore to me. He said, mate, first year was really fucking hard. I failed a couple of subjects. And this like light bulb just immediately went off in my head. It gives me goosebumps to think about it. When he said that he failed subjects, this really awesome, smart guy, it made me realize if he failed, maybe this is okay. Maybe this is normal. And I was like, screw it, I'm going to come back tomorrow. And then I was just like, all right, that was all right. I came back again and I came back again and again. And I just kept coming back, and I went from failing to passing and passing to graduating with honors somehow and getting my absolute dream job. But none of that matters. What matters is that like in my university experience, I met my wife and I met my business partner, Ben, and my best friends. And I came on this path and it was so different to where I thought I was going to go. And that was all because of this one chance moment. And there are so many people that struggle at university and they just need someone to tap them on the shoulder and tell them it's going to be okay. And that's like the impetus behind everything. So when our whole company wakes up in the day, like we're here to do something. We want to change the world. Like the way we want to change the world is that, and I know you believe this, David, like education is the single biggest engine for social change and social mobility. If we want to impact the world and give equal opportunity, it's going to come from more wide access education. But I don't just think education is the issue or access to education. I think access to quality learning is where the challenge is. And people are such a big part of that. Like that human experience that I had is really what can make a difference. And universities understand this. And like universities on average in Australia spend between $5,000 and $7,000 per student per year trying to give support services to their students, like mentoring, tutoring, counseling, advising, and in America, I think it's close to 10,000. It's just that they don't know how to do this. Universities shove all their students into a physical space, still post-COVID, shake it all up and just hope that it works out. And for a long time it did, but student populations are becoming more diverse. Life challenges for young people are becoming more diverse. With this post-COVID landscape, half of the students have never set foot on campus. The human experience doesn't accidentally happen anymore. So I guess the compounding forces to what I see happening in the industry right now are, first thing is like enrollments are declining. For the first time ever, really, we've had a great run in higher education for like thousands of years, and now it's declining across the board. Then on top of that, we've let our like expenses balloon as an industry. Like the way we just run universities is so expensive. So we had this like really prescient moment in time where costs and expenses are so critical to the success of universities or the survival of universities. And with the declining enrollments and these exorbitant costs, like retention is more important than it's ever been. Like before it was important from like a cursory perspective, like we don't want students to drop out. But now if students drop out, universities will shut down. Not across the board.
Go under.
But like they will go under. And you might have even said this on my podcast, but Dave, but there are these like community colleges that have like hundreds of students. If a couple of people drop out there, like they're redlining right now. They're done. There's this interesting moment where universities more than ever need to support their students through to retention, through to degrees, through to these life-changing experiences and transformations that they can provide. So they can't let students fall through the cracks. So the way we see it is like universities for the first time are really actively trying to offer support proactively and repeatedly. And in countries like Australia, the government is now coming in and putting pressure down to do the same thing. So I guess like the biggest trend that I see happening, and I'm biased, I love the support space, the support ecosystem that universities run. That's what I've dedicated my life to. But I believe it's like this 1998 moment. The beginning of 1998, no one had an LMS. Blackboard came along, they invented the LMS. Within 5 years, every university in the world effectively had an LMS. And most of them had Blackboard. But forever and fundamentally, irreversibly changed for the better, and everyone brought content in a space where students could properly engage. And that's never happened to people. For the first time ever, I feel like the industry is starting to see this, and they're starting to try and bring their people together and their support services into one space so that students don't have to accidentally have that experience I had, but they're actively giving the support to students. And when you use data and technology effectively, you can give students the right help at the right time. And I heard Ian Dunn say it at a conference. He said the only way a regular university can compete with a Stanford is when they really effectively use their data, because Stanford can throw money at the problem. Most universities can't. I don't know. You gave me a lot of space to run, a lot of rope there. That's what I'm enjoying about the industry right now, is that I feel like there is a step in the right direction going on.
Totally. I think you've touched on some really big trends that have been damaging the sector, both the cost side, spiraling out of control, and also enrollments. And enrollments are partly a function of demographics, but also partly of the kind of value for money idea, which has also then brought through government attention. on the matter. So it's like a triple whammy for the institutions. And yes, it's a difficult time. One of our partners in the UK, I won't name them, but they sent us an email, I think 2 days ago, saying that they're looking at running a £20 million deficit just this year. And they only have revenues of 150 million. Yeah, it's really, it's very difficult for them to navigate out of that, really. And so taking a step back a little, in terms of Vygo and the background, you talked a lot about your journey as a student, your motivations. You actually reminded me of a story at my high school in Bunbury. Most kids go into trades, maybe a fifth go into university. But the careers group there were part of the trades department, and they were like aggressively pushing everyone into trades. And trades are a great thing, particularly in Australia, like important skill, pays well, etc. But it just felt like the mix was wrong. Perhaps the reverse of a private school where they're trying to push everyone aggressively into university. And I remember a kid of mine who's a friend of mine who's now an engineer like yourself. Yeah, exactly. Clearly dad brain from this morning. Yeah, they told him like it'd be stupid to do engineering. And this was like before he'd started his year 11 and 12, like his final years of school. He should do a trade, etc., etc. But unfortunately, he didn't listen to them, and he felt he wanted to. He felt that he could, and then he went on to do it. And yeah, he's now doing really well. So these kind of singular moments in life can have a huge impact on the rest of your life. And unfortunately, in this case, the moment for him was pushing in the wrong direction, where I felt like if he'd had some support, that could have been a pivotal moment for him that had been like uplifting and helped and whatnot. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing. But I want to learn a bit more about the background of Vygo, the company, like how you and Ben connected, who your first partner institution was, how that happened. I want to hear a bit more about the history.
How much do I want to share is the real question here. As far as the founders go, like we've all been friends for a really long time, and I feel so fortunate in business. Business is a pretty big killer for friendships, but really we've been so lucky. So I met Ben at university. We met like early on in our degrees, and we just hit it off, and we did all of our assignments together and hung out and frequented some of the establishments on campus for juices. And then he was best man at my wedding, and I was best man at his wedding, and now we still hang out on the weekends together, and we hang out before work some days together. I've been really lucky. And then our other co-founder, Stephen, he was friends with Ben from even before that, when Ben was a teenager playing in bands, and so we've just all been really good friends for a long time, and that's been a unique pillar of our business and a really unique pillar of the culture that we've brought together as well. That's really lucky. And I remember even just on that, Dave, a couple of years back, you were at a conference and you said, hey, would you guys do a business together again? And we were both just like, oh, absolutely. And it threw you a little bit. You're like, really? That's so unique. So that's a big part of where it's come from. And we've gone through a lot of iterations as a business and as friends. The very first version of Vygo is that we just saw this problem on campus where people just couldn't get the help they needed. And so I just put up, well, Ben and I, we put up hundreds of posters. We've probably put up thousands or 10,000 posters ourselves by this point. But at the beginning, we just put up hundreds of posters that said, can you help in these 8 subjects? Which is 8 subjects we knew were hard at university. And I just had my phone number on it. And like all these people started texting me. And then we put up another post the week later when I had a couple hundred people message me and said, do you want help in these 8 subjects? And it was honestly like a nightmare of a success, because like I'm an engineer at this point, like just trying to like text people back being like, hey Dave, can you help Randy on Thursday or whatever? And we made no money. Like it was just, we're just trying to help each other. From there, we built a website that directed to my phone, and then eventually we built an app, which was awesome. But it was a consumer facing product because we had no idea what enterprise SaaS was, or that universities were trying to solve this. We were just like, let's just solve this ourselves and make a tiny clip on the ticket, terrible business model, and just go out on our own. And then over time, we saw that universities were really trying to solve this, and we saw an opportunity to work with universities. Our first proper client was University of Queensland, and it was their international school. It was like a little sub-school of University of Queensland, and it was about language support. So we'd grown past just academic tutoring into just helping people where they needed help, and that could be mentoring or whatever. It was just like a crazy experience first time we started working with them, and we had like reporting requirements, and they wanted to see the data, and we're like, why do you care about any of this? So we started there, and then over there it's just really grown over time. We've been really lucky though, and been surrounded by amazing people. Like I can't overstate that. Like I could never overstate it, but even if I said like I spent hours on it, like we were really lucky and we got to go through like a lot of different accelerators, and accelerators were amazing for us. And an accelerator, for those who don't know, is like a 6-month intensive where you get together with another 10 startups and incredible successful founders and people, and they invest money in your company, and then they mentor you for 6 months. And it felt like I did an entire degree in that phase. We've been surrounded by amazing people, had amazing mentors the whole way through, and we still do have incredible advisors surrounding us. So it's gone through a lot of iterations. At the beginning we were just tutoring, then we did mentoring, and then we saw years and years ago this idea of building a platform that could bring everything together. But it took us a long time to get there. It took us a lot of iterations to get there and a lot of podcast episodes to get there as well.
Your original podcast, a lot of it covers it's probably not so much the earliest part of the journey, but like the build up to the Series A. Some really hairy moments, some really exciting moments. And as an investor in your Series A, it's like cool to just listen to all of that and understand better how you guys are thinking and feeling and whatnot. I highly recommend it if anyone's interested. And it actually feels a bit like a serial or like one of those podcasts. It's like super professionally put together, cut really well. So definitely go check it out. You have to drop the name of the accelerator for those interested. And then moving on from there, if we think about students at the institutions like the University of Queensland's International School, what do you think their expectations are? Like what are they looking to both have in terms of their experience, but also get from the institution and one another? I think you talked a bit about what you expected, but I think things have changed a bit now.
Yeah. The accelerator at the time was called River City Labs, and it was run by Steve Baxter, who's one of the sharks off Shark Tank, but that one's now shut down. So just go to any accelerator. Go to any accelerator that doesn't charge you. They should be giving you money. That's my only caveat. But when you're surrounded by incredible people who are ambitious to try and do the same thing as you will go a whole lot faster. But I think it's a really interesting question, Dave, about what were the expectations of the students at the time. And I think international students, especially at that time, were such like a fundamentally good example of what students in general expect. And it is human connection. And they were so severely starved of it when we started working with them. There was these international students. So this was actually like a language school where a lot of the students were learning English for the first time and really struggled to speak English and were very nervous about speaking English. So these students were sold by international student agents who go all around the world and sell this dream of come to Australia. And I spoke to a bunch of the international students and I said, what did they tell you would happen? And they said that, we'd come here, we'd get an Australian boyfriend or girlfriend, we'd go surfing every weekend, and we'd have a bunch of these like Aussie friends and see kangaroos. Like it was so much about this experience. Like they didn't ever speak about the degree. They didn't care. They're like, I want to come over here and meet people and indulge in this culture and learn about who I am. And that's actually true for all students all the time. You just don't necessarily see it so pronounced as when language is a barrier. So when they came in, they wanted to meet people, but they couldn't. When we first launched with these students, we were like, this is a massive failure. We're getting no engagement because we didn't at the time track chat-based data, like about how many interactions were happening through chat. And we just didn't see any like video sessions happening or in-person sessions. As soon as we turned on chat data, we were like, holy shit, we've never seen so much engagement in any of the iterations of the platform before. And we struggle to see engagement at that level now because we were able to lower the barrier to entry to them where they could send a message. They weren't so scared. That was a little bit more like within their confidence limits.
If English isn't your first language, easier to chat via a text than face to face, of course. The other thing that you touched on there that's really interesting and takes me back to a prior point of yours. University, you're just thrown into this anonymous sea of people where both you feel the institution isn't really tracking you at all or understanding where you are or who you are, but also often, particularly if you don't come with school friends. So I came from the countryside, very few kids from my school were at the university. You don't know any other students and you feel the same way there. Relative to if you go back to high school, it's like the complete opposite. It's like super structured. All the teachers know your names. The school are really accountable for like you even just attending or going from one class to another, right? And of course, how you're doing and how you're feeling. And that's just not the case with university, and certainly international schools is probably even worse because you've got all of what I just mentioned, plus cultural language differences, etc. Yeah, interested to hear your thoughts on have institutions gotten any better since you and I went to university at like creating a sense of belonging and connection rather than like being in the sea of anonymity?
That is an interesting question that I don't think I have a clear answer to. I've seen arguments for both. Like some of our clients that we work with, I think are doing an incredible job, but I'm biased because they're using us and like we're seeing the impact and we're getting like mountains of feedback from students for just saying that, like, I feel like I belong here. Like I got to meet a friend. Someone knows my name. And so like you see that and you can't help but smile. Look, stuff is changing. Then you see things like the government cracking down in Australia. Hey, you better do this because we know that it makes a difference. You've got to support your students in this way. And that makes them feel like they're part of it. But then you see other people who are like out in the industry and thought leaders and saying, if they don't make it, they were never meant to be here. And so you get this like really old school thinking in there as well. So higher education is just so fragmented that you just see the best of it and the worst of it at the same time across the board. I think you're going to continue to see that for a while until big government pressures force it. There's a giant competitive tension where they're going to go bankrupt because there's a better alternative for people to have these transformational experiences or get the jobs that they're after. Or eventually all the people that are in education now will just eventually die. And all of the new thinking will come in over time and change it in that way as well. People didn't convince everyone in the world that the world was round and not flat. They just convinced a lot of people, and eventually the non-believers just died, and then eventually it kind of became common practice and common understanding.
It's a fascinating point. Yeah, a lot of social change is actually new people being born and older people dying. You look at political views and voting, for instance, it doesn't change that much in one individual's lifetime once they're about 25, 30. I think things like gay marriage, a huge part of that becoming a thing is obviously just new younger voters and less older voters. So yeah, and it feels like higher ed, not just in this space, but in a variety of spaces, in this pivotal point where maybe, I don't know, 10 to 20% of the institutions are adopting new practices, new technologies, trying to do things differently. The broad part of the sector is looking at that and being like, maybe we should do that too. And to your point, either they step forward and adopt a system like Vygo and get really focused on student engagement, and the sector has a promising future, or they don't. And I think they'll get punished on two ends by students dropping out, students not coming in the first place because they don't see the value, and the government just punishing them as well with regulations and whatnot, which is not just limited to Australia. The US and the UK have these kind of gainful employment type regulations coming in to try to align the course with the job outcomes. So it's a really pivotal, interesting moment. It feels like the more pressure there is, and unfortunately, the more kind of negative examples there are of an institution struggling, the more it will push things in the right direction. I certainly feel optimistic, but things move slowly in this space, so it could be a while. So thinking about some examples, for instance, if we're looking at students and inadequate academic support, can you think of some examples of this and how it would impact their performance and motivation?
Oh, yeah. If someone struggles academically, they don't know where to turn, they just fail an assignment. Like when someone hasn't made a friendship group, and they can't ask their friends, and if they don't know that there's a tutoring center that's open, or they can't make it to campus when they do in-person tutoring at 2 p.m., they just will not pass that assignment. If you fundamentally don't understand an idea, you just can't do it. You need someone to be there. If you're early on in your degree, or any point in your degree, but if you're early on in your degree, like there's some crazy statistic I heard, and I need to find what it is, but it's something like if someone knows your name on campus within the first 6 weeks of being there, your chance of passing your degree is increased by like 50% or something like that. I'm making these numbers up, but it's something wild like that.
If I have to think of like my cohort that went through with me, again, a lot from the countryside, many of the kids that moved to the Perth, didn't really know anyone on campus, lived alone or with some tenuous family member they didn't know very well, came to campus, they're the ones that dropped out really fast, like your example of no one knows their name kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so how does Vygo and an institution solve that? So that kid, they're moving from Bunbury to Perth, they know literally no one, they're from a government school. Obviously, most of the kids at this university are from like the local private schools. How do you fix that for this kid?
Yeah, it's really simple. Fundamentally, our whole premise is that we just connect you with the right people at the right time. But the first piece of context here is that universities have generally pretty good support services. And if they're not pretty good, they at least have support services. Like there are things there to support the students. It's just that they're run in a disaggregated, competing manner, often out of spreadsheets, often in emails, or like taking a phone number off a board. And I swear to God, in the last several years, there was a university in Australia that I went to that students had to pick up a form and fill out the form, and they could either take a picture and scan it back, which is okay, or it had a fax number on it. And I was like, what students have a fax machine? It's hard to engage with these services, and you have to be very active to go to those efforts. What we do is we take all those support services, say they have 100. We take all 100 support services, we put them onto our platform so that you can come here. If you need academic tutoring, there's a program there. You can find the person who can help in your subject. You can chat with them, book a session with them, get on campus with them, chat online with them. It's all about that connection with that person. So what that looks like for a commencing student. They get into the university. It's before O Week, just before they're about to start, they're really thinking about university. The university uses an API. They invite that student into our platform. The student gets invited, like, hey, this is University of BibleU's like support platform. Come on in. We want to connect you with the right people. Either the university's given us all the data and we just already know about it, or we ask them, but likely we already know all the information about them. And we just say, hey, guess what? Dave is the perfect person for you. So within a couple of seconds of being in the platform, they're just showing Dave's face and it says, jump into a chat with Dave. And you just immediately get put into a conversation with someone who's trained on the other side to know how to engage with you. So you have that first interaction. That first interaction is what we really are passionate about. From there, it's choose your own adventure. Do you want more social support? Do you want more academic support, more well-being support? Is there a major life kind of crisis happening in your life at that point in time? And you get to go around from there. But it's all about that first interaction is so important. So we want to make sure we always nail that one.
Interesting. You're totally right. And it felt like some of those students, maybe that have a couple of not so good early interactions, like they'd try to speak to someone in a lecture, but that kid's from a private school with loads of friends, so they didn't need more friends and it didn't lead to anything, not necessarily out of bad intentions or anything, just, that's how social interactions happen. And you can be really unlucky when you're like at uni and desperately in need of one person to know your name. And thinking about the in-person side of things, obviously your tech is there to make sure everyone's linked virtually, but clearly the in-person part, whether that be, well, I guess a video call or actually meeting or doing an event, how do you guys perceive your product and service as being, platform versus in-person, and how important is the in-person? Because if I think about BibleU, which has moved from 100% office space to 100% office space plus remote stuff in the US, and then COVID comes along and we go fully remote. And then since then, largely remote. There's some things you can't do purely virtually. And I'm a big proponent, like I get my direct reports every Thursday in the office together, just to build a bit more of that kind of face-to-face connection. I think as VR gets better, and like you and I could sit down, feel like we're literally in the same space, not like pixely, like cartoonish, but like genuinely our mind isn't really sure whether we're in, ASU together or you're in Queensland, I'm in the UK having a spice margarita or something. I think VR will change that, but we're probably 10 plus years away. Hard to say exactly from that, but interesting to hear your thoughts on how important in-person is for both the student experience and for Vygo as well.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important, but it depends on the group of people that you're looking at. But for students, I think it's really, really important to make it a realistic option for people. So we don't see our platform taking away from in-person experience, but amplifying in-person experience and giving options when that's not right for you. So we have events on our platform, group sessions and individual sessions, and chat. Chat's obviously, online all the time, but chat's a great way to initially engage, get to know people before you feel confident enough to be in person with someone or on a video call with someone. But when you book a session with someone, you just book it wherever makes sense for you. Is it in person? Are you both on the same campus? If so, awesome. If you want to be it online because it doesn't make sense that day, you just do it like that as well. So it's like Dave, when I was living in London as well, like occasionally we'd be in person, occasionally we would catch up online. It just kind of made sense for our calendar. So we're the same as students, but we encourage our partners to have a lot of on-campus events, and a lot of the events that they offer should be in person, but it shouldn't be fully that, because otherwise you're just alienating people that can't get there. Parents that have kids that are studying, or people that have to spend a couple of weeks out of the city or overseas. You still want to give them adequate access to these support services as well. So I think multimodal is super key, but I think your platform shouldn't ever prevent in person. It should be the initial connection tool, and initial connections can happen online very easily. But then the way that these relationships should engage really depend on the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think some software companies get too hung up on being platform only and like anything that's not purely platform is not good. But in reality, most people want to interact with a product that's both, you know, some sort of software, but also a service. And in this case, the service is like they meet in person, you guys foster events, etc. And also that part of the service is on the back end where your team are talking to the university's team, helping them build things. It's not just a pure student inputs into code kind of thing. And I think the best products actually incorporate both. I actually was listening to a podcast the other day about Roblox, talking of dad stuff again, the kids software that's like a bit like Minecraft. You can build your own game worlds in there. It's got hundreds of millions of users. Having a lot of issues now with child safety. Now, obviously, at the university level, it's a different matter. You're dealing with adults. Although, interestingly, West Oz, I started at 17. Everybody started at 17 until recently. So we had some weird kind of challenges that the university was essentially caretaking for like all these like technically children, but they've since changed the school age. So everyone's 18 now. Yeah, what do you guys do in terms of like safety and well-being? Because obviously you can't control these conversations. You obviously want to provide privacy, but at the same time you want to protect the students and staff to a degree as well. So how do you manage that?
I'm so glad you asked this. Like, universities aren't thinking about this enough. If you think about it, they're running support services already. They're all happening by email or texting people directly on their phone numbers or in person, like
WhatsApp or whatever, right? Completely off the radar.
Exactly. So all these relationships that we make happen on our platform are already happening, but they're happening in the dark and the university has no idea. So we are a platform that sheds light on all the data. Every single session that happens on our platform is rated. If there's a 1 star, there's probably a reason for that and it's worth working into. So we have systems where messages can be flagged or sessions can be flagged, and that gets raised to the right people in the university or in our team that get then to the universities. So we've built all of these systems, but like, if you don't have a platform like this, it's just all happening. And I guarantee you there's probably bad shit happening because it's not happening in a safe space. So you need to actually have a safe space that you can trust where there are safety systems for students, and you need to build them in, and you need to build them so they're easy to use and they go to the right people, because there are people at university that are there to deal with this as well. So you just need to make sure those things link up. So we take it very seriously, and whether that's safety, someone feeling uncomfortable, mental health issues, that stuff can get flagged and has been flagged in our platform and taken to the right people. When a university is nervous of a student, we have that data. We know what's happening. We can feed into and shed light on situations that was previously hidden.
And it's awesome that you've got this great paper trail. So if anything does happen, if somebody has done something bad, there's a lot of evidence to punish them adequately and correctly. But also, you've got all the support services right there. So if a student ends up in a situation that's uncomfortable, they can go talk to a counselor, or it's quite easy for them to access. So that's super cool as well, like having the chat and interactions alongside the support, the pastoral support. We had an incident at Oxford actually with an inappropriate relationship between a staff member and a student. And it, as you say, it was all in the dark. Like most people weren't aware what was going on, etc. I'm not sure there was much of a paper trail of what had happened. Ultimately, the staff member was terminated, and rightfully so as well. But it all just felt complicated. The institution was slow to respond. Obviously, when they were doing their process, it took way too long because they didn't really have any clear paper trail initially, at least. I think maybe when the police were involved, that's when they actually got access to some more information. But yeah, it just felt like that kind of interaction, if it were to happen on a platform, it'd be tracked and flagged early, and there'd be more people around to be like, hey, that's not like the way these two interacting is not normal. There's something going on here. Or that the staff member that was in the wrong here, they may feel that, I'm on this platform, I need to behave myself. It's a work environment. Whereas if they're WhatsApping someone, maybe that like mentally they're not thinking that way. So I think it's like a double protection thing for the students anyway, which is really cool. We're going to have to wrap up in a second, but just wanted to ask if there are any last thoughts, anything you wanted to plug.
Yeah, look, I'm so passionate about this space. So if you're passionate about education, if you're passionate about like the human side of it, like hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd love to have a conversation about this space. Check out the Broken Education podcast, which is our education podcast, which I absolutely love. And if you want to hear a little bit more about Vygo's journey as well, the podcast Dave was mentioning is called Unicorn Launcher. It's a very raw and vulnerable podcast. So if you want to hear, fights between founders and me crying and the awesome moments too. It's all in there as well. But yeah, reach out. I love having these conversations with people.
And honestly, Joel, Unicorn Launcher is like, as I said, it's kind of up there with Serial and those top podcasts in the sense that there's similar kind of vibe and feel where you go through this emotional roller coaster, or you personally went through it, but as a listener, you're listening. There's just not much in the startup space. Like, obviously, the more we progress along as founders with our companies, we tend to get more private, more polished in our image. And we've all experienced similar types of things. I think people often either don't talk about it, they don't admit it, or they won't put it on public record. So for you guys to like have done this podcast, super. I really connected with it personally. So anyone interested in like how hard building a company can be, but also like some of the highs that come with it, the successes, you got to check out Unicorn Launcher. And obviously Joel and I have been on Joel's other podcast together too, so do check that out too. So thank you all for joining us today and listening. Do like, give us a subscribe, and we look forward to having you join us next time.